I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was anymore.
Getting to know you as a person, your value as a person. You are not your job.
Because I think a lot of people are afraid of leaving law and then losing their identity.
That doesn't determine my value as a human being.
I have the ability to be able to pretty much do what I want.
I think in this life, to be successful, you have to be extremely flexible.
How would you suggest people bridge that gap?
That wasn't who I was inside of me. That isn't my soul.
We found a different identity. So, Helen, we both left law, but still kind of kept our foot in the legal door. So, we weren't in law, but we were still kind of serving the legal community, and we still are now. I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people are afraid of leaving law and then losing their identity. They've always been known as a lawyer. They think like a lawyer, they act like one. That's been their career, that their job, that's everything they've worked towards their whole lives. And then suddenly one day they no longer have that identity. And honestly, you'd be surprised at the number of people that I've spoken to where they were like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I'm interested to know, did you get that experience?
No, I didn't get that experience, but there's a reason for it. I think for so much of our lives, when we're really, really busy, particularly when you're busy in law because you've just got no space for anything else, you're working crazy hours. When you're not working, you're probably trying to, work hard, play hard, be out with friends, having dinner, or you're looking after your kids or your family or whatever. There's just no space. You don't always have a chance to really get to know yourself. And I think we often see this from a psychological perspective with people who, at a later point in their career, maybe something bad happens, maybe they have mental illness, maybe they lose their jobs or something. And it's like that thing just pushes them over the edge. You hear these terrible stories of, I remember it in the 2008 crisis. I think obviously, there were some bankers who lost their jobs and then they went and took their lives, because that was their identity, that was their sense of who they were. And I think if we don't do the deeper work on ourselves, the inner work, getting to know you as a person, your value as a person, you are not your job. Like, I worked as a lawyer. I wasn't a lawyer, if that makes sense. Like, that wasn't who I was inside of me. That isn't my soul. My soul doesn't have lawyer stamped across it, although some people might feel that that's the case. It's not true. It's just something that you do. And I think that's the danger when we identify with something so strongly, that thing becomes what we think we are. I think by the time I'd left law, I don't know, I'd done a huge amount of work on myself. I think I also didn't come from a background where I was told that my career and everything was who I was, which is really, really key. I think if all the time you're told, okay, your school, your grades, that's who you are and that defines your value, you take that through into your working life, and then it's really hard to split that and think that's just something I do. That doesn't determine my value as a human being.
But in saying that, I think it's quite difficult to split the two identities of you as a real person and you being a lawyer, because the reality is you work day in day out. You focus on, the cases and your work, and then by the time it gets to the weekend, you're so shattered that you have no mental space. Well, I didn't, and a lot of people don't. No space or time to actually put your energies into doing something else. And I stopped doing a lot of hobbies when I started my career because I just didn't have that energy to do anything else. I used to love doing sports activities, music, loads of different things. And I even tried to do some of them outside of work, but it got to a point where I was like, I'm so exhausted and my mind is taking up too much space for law that I cannot focus on anything else.
And yeah, I totally get that. And I think that's slightly, the irony of law, because a lot of the big firms, or all of the big firms, all of the top firms will say, we want all singing, all dancing trainees. Your extracurricular list needs to be as long as my arm. But as soon as you get to that firm, you are not going to have any time for extracurricular activities. So Forget about the piano, forget about your CrossFit, forget about your Ironman, whatever it is, you can forget it. So that's the whole irony. But I know what you mean. It is really difficult. But I think that's where, at best, you start actually understanding what your real identity is before law. And I think it's about having that that mindset, that introspection, go to therapy, have coaching, like do the personal growth work, because then even in those low moments where you don't have a lot of space, you can still at least acknowledge there's a voice in you saying, I do get it that this job isn't me, or this feeling of dissatisfaction or loneliness or depression or whatever. This isn't who I am as a person. Because I think the problem is when you identify so closely with it, then you think without that thing, you're nothing, you're worthless. And by the way, loads of people struggle with this on retirement. I coach people at that point where people think, well, what happens to me now that I'm not a lawyer? And I've been a lawyer all my life. Men in particular really struggle with this. You see it all the time with these senior male partners. I know of so many people like this where they say they're leaving because they want to go to their house kind of in the south of France and their wife's badgering them, but actually they don't want to leave because they've got power, they've got money, they've got status,
Hmm.
and what, they become a nobody after that.
Yeah,
It's terrifying for people.
it is. It really is. Yeah, I think for me, leaving law was kind of fine because we found a different identity. And now I much prefer the identity that I have because it's more me. I have the ability to be able to pretty much do what I want and be who I want. But in law it's quite restrictive, and I think a lot of people don't see that, and they can't see like the jump from going from law to the next thing, whether it's being retired, whether it's finding a new business, whether it's finding a new role completely just in a different industry. They just see that identity that they have now and they're like, the gap seems so big from what they have till that next step. How would you suggest people bridge that gap?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things to what you say. I suppose I'm taking a position which is kind of, I don't value myself according to the job that I do. Well, I think I do and I don't. Let me caveat it. But I'd like to say I don't. Like, for example, I love it when I go on Buddhist meditation retreats. Nobody asks what I do or what I have done for a career. Nobody cares. They care about getting to know me as a person. I like environments where the first question is not, oh, what is it you do? Or the second question. So I think that's the problem. You get that a lot in like London circles, even here in Bali where I'm living. If I just meet people out and about, that won't be their first question. It might just be their question when I say I'm, like, oh, I've got my laptop. Then like, oh, you're doing something like for work or cool, but like it isn't it because they're valuing me as a human being. So I think when you're talking about bridging that gap between one thing to the next thing, the deepest, the most profound and fulfilling thing you can do for your soul is to start working out, if you take away all labels, how can you value yourself as a human being? Because at the end of the day, all these things are impermanent, right? Labels can be taken away, material items, money, all that sort of thing. So who are you left with at the end of the day? Now, I caveat this because I think I've slightly cheated in that now, if someone says to me, what do you do? Oh, I used to be a lawyer and now I coach lawyers.
Hmm.
So I've still got the status. So
Hmm.
actually, I think I'm kind of cheating myself a bit. Do I think that I would be in pieces on the floor if I couldn't say I was a lawyer? No, but I probably quite like it if I'm being really honest with myself. There is a big status thing around it, right? I
Yeah,
don't know what's your experience and what do you think?
I feel
What do you
exactly the
think?
same. When people ask me what I do or, whatever, well, do. I think the only reason why I have to say I was a lawyer and now you know, is because the thing that I'm doing now would seem so random otherwise if I didn't give that one sentence of context.
It's interesting because you said, for example, that you feel like you have to mention that because otherwise it would seem random. So that's quite a big thing. Feeling so you have to mention, oh, I was a lawyer because otherwise it would seem like, why are you trying to justify it?
I think it's because it's very niche and specific that even when I haven't mentioned it to people before, I've just been like, I do basically, in a nutshell, it's like marketing for law. And people are like, that's niche. And it's like, yeah, I used to be a lawyer. I know the market. And so now it's just like, I add that context.
But that's interesting because that's still kind of a justification, isn't it?
It is actually, yeah.
Okay, going back to what you said a moment ago, what would you say is your identity now? Because you say you like your identity better now.
I would say my identity now, I don't know if this is an identity because I'm not really sure what you would classify an identity as, like what people do in general. I know what I do, but I would either call myself, like, as in my identity is either an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, whatever, or a creative person. Because I create stuff, whether it's marketing, whether it's podcasts, conversations, like I'm a bit of a LinkedIn posts, I'm a bit of a creative, I would say. So I'd say one of them would be my identity. What would you say yours is?
Which is, I'm really fascinated by that. Before I talk about me for a second, because I think it's interesting. Because if we think of you before, you were saying you were a lawyer, and now you're kind of describing yourself as a creative. And if you think about it, being a creative is, it's a kind of abstract flexible term which gives you a lot of leeway to sort of bring your real deeper self through. You could be writing posts, you could be speaking on podcasts, you could be creating all sorts of stuff, right? And also within that there's kind of not a sense of right or wrong. I wonder if that's actually, like, if we're thinking about identity, that's quite different. Being something like a creative, which isn't like a specific thing, right? You can't really fail or succeed at being a creative, I suppose. But there's this thing, being a lawyer is like, okay, so if you're fired from your job, then oh my god, your life's over and you failed or whatever. I know I'm talking about failure and success a lot here, which is probably helpful or unhelpful. But just this idea that, oh my gosh, I'm wrapped up in this thing, that I must be this lawyer. But actually being a creative feels, I don't know, it feels expansive, it feels freeing. I don't know how that feels for you.
Yeah, it feels exactly that, which is why I like to identify myself as that, you know? I guess another identity would be digital nomad. It's the same thing. Being free, being flexible, being able to move around and do what you want.
But it's interestingly, it's not a specific job. Like you could have said to me there, oh, I'm a podcaster, or I identify as, I don't know, even like a business owner. Or I suppose you did say entrepreneur, but like business owner who provides podcasting services. Like it's still that kind of specific, I am that thing, right? But I love this sort of, I am a creative, because I feel like, yeah, if you suddenly stop podcasting tomorrow, you could express yourself in different ways and not feel as though you're not you somehow. I don't know.
Completely. And I think it just taps into me and how I've always been. Like I've always been a creative person, whether it's like music, crafts, like whatever, art, drama, singing, anything. I've always been a creative person. So for me now, I feel like my identity is like pretty much aligned with me right now, do you know?
I think that's something that's really deep, isn't it? Because you're saying I feel like my identity is aligned with me. I mean, if we're getting into sort of psychology perspectives on this, really what we're talking about is, it's the outer self which the rest of the world, which interacts with the rest of the world. It's what other people see. You could label that your personality, maybe in some framings. So that's interesting. What I'm hearing from what you're saying there is kind of my outer self, or presentation to the world, or perception, whatever, is in alignment with my deeper self.
Yes, exactly.
And that is so powerful, because I think what we're talking about is, we're saying I'm a lawyer, or I'm a banker, or I'm a teacher, whatever. That's a thing on the outside. That's not who you are in your soul. So it's like, actually what we're talking about is, when you identify as an outside object, actually how much is your inner self really aligned, or can it be aligned with that?
And I think if people are concerned about their identity and like what their identity is, then they should think about what do they enjoy doing, what are their passions, what do they really feel inside. Because if you are a creative person, as in you love to create stuff, or perhaps you are an artist, that's an identity. Like whatever it is, that should be your identity, and that should be the thing that you hold on to, as opposed to the job that you do. I mean, let's say, I mean, I also think that I think creative, like, that comes under a lot of, there's a lot of things that come under that, including, like, language as well. Me and you, we both love language. That's creative, I think. Like, I think lawyers, if you're a lawyer and you genuinely love analyzing stuff, writing stuff, whatever, you shouldn't say your identity as a lawyer. You should say your identity is like a linguist, or like if you're a lawyer and you truly love the stuff that's involves like going through cases, analyzing documents, and that's the aspect that you love and you would do that in your spare time and that's like you deep down, then I wouldn't say your identity is a lawyer. I would say your identity is, I don't know what the word would be for it, but maybe even someone who loves to learn, like a learner, a reader, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I really like that. It's that thing of sort of noticing what you enjoy, isn't it? It's saying, I love reading, I love analysis, maybe I love history,
Yeah.
all these different things. An external thing can never define us. And yeah, I think a really interesting aspect of this as well for me is someone was really surprised the other day when they were talking to me and they were saying, okay, so now you've built this business. So where are you going to go with this business and what are you going to do with that? And I've got ideas and I've got cool ideas. And, I wake up every day, as we both do, and think of new cool things we could do. I'm also aware that in a really weird way, it's my passion. It's what I pour my heart and soul into. But I also may be doing something very different in a couple of years' time. I'm not sure how attached to it I am. I'm more attached to the journey. I mean, I love creating just like you do. But if someone said to me tomorrow, oh no, you can't write anymore. I love writing. I love writing for LinkedIn and all that kind of thing. I'd be like, okay, yeah, maybe that's kind of sad. But I don't know, I'd find other outlets or, you know, I think it's just, I'm not attached to this idea of being something anymore. And I think people find that strange. It's that thing of, oh my gosh, wow, you would just build that whole business and then do something different. I'm like, yeah, but how do I know like what person I'll be in 5 years' time? Might want to live somewhere different. My life might look really different. And you know what? It will have been amazing because it will have been a really cool journey and I wouldn't have missed a second of it. But how do I know the person I'll be then? I think we attach so much to these outer things and it's like you can't take it with you when you die. So I'm not saying don't achieve things. I'm not saying don't have success, but why so much attachment?
So what would you say your identity is now then?
I mean, I suppose if I were describing myself to someone, I'd say, I'm a lawyer who, a former lawyer who helps other lawyers and coaches them. But I don't know. I don't know if I don't really define that as my identity. Probably somebody who I like travel, I like adventure, I like to live on the edge a bit. I like to do cool things that other people aren't doing. I like to jump on my scooter each day here, feel the wind in my hair, feel free, meet cool new people, try different foods,
Hmm.
create a really cool business, meet amazing people every day. I guess I'm describing things that I love every day in my life rather than I don't identify that. I mean, I think if I were to try and describe what I identify as, it'd be a really deep question. I'm not really sure. It's like, I suppose it's deeply philosophical, really, isn't it? But it's who am I? Well, gosh, we could go on debating that until the cows come home. But I don't define myself by what I do. I don't define myself by my LinkedIn following. I'm aware that, that's something I've cultivated, I'm very proud of, and I love that community. I'm equally aware it's owned by LinkedIn at the end of the day. They can just decide, oh, we're going to scrap your account or whatever. Nothing I can do about it. I'd be upset. Sure, I'd be really upset, but this is the problem. If we identify with things that can just be taken away, I think in this life, to be successful, you have to be extremely flexible. So if you're too rigid, then it's going to be too painful when things are taken away.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Holly?
I think that's why, like you say, you shouldn't attach yourself to different identities that can be taken away from you. And it just goes back to the point that I was saying about you've just got to look at what you enjoy doing, what you really like to do as a person, what are your passions, and how can you define them as opposed to other things defining you.
I love that. That how can you define them? It's like sort of putting you back in the driver's seat, isn't it? And giving you that choice. And there's that sort of old adage people always say, which is, on your deathbed, you don't wish you'd spent another day in the office. I mean, obviously, there's the whole thing with that of when, you're doing something you love, perhaps it's up for debate, but perhaps you never work a day in your life. And I do believe that actually to a large extent.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, actually, you're not going to look back at your life and think, oh, I wish I had done that thing which I hated a bit more, or been another day in the office or something like that, probably, unless you absolutely were passionate about your job. So it's like, well, how can you actually be living each day in alignment with yourself in a way that brings you joy, that brings you fulfillment? And are you perhaps attaching to labels which are helpful or unhelpful?